Hello, I am Professor Eric Martin here at Lewis Clark State College, and welcome to the final surge for History 102. You finished the first two-thirds of the course, and now we got the last third of the course in front of us. I know some of you were tired. I know we've been moving at a pretty good pace. Now is not the time to give up. Just hang in there here for the next 5 weeks and see where we go, huh? The next 4 weeks, so we got 4 discussions plus an exam. The next 4 weeks are going to be focused on the 20th century. So up to now, this second third of the class was really focused on the 19th and to some degree the 18th century, depending on how you want to frame it. But these next 4 weeks are going to be focused on the 20th century. Now, some historians, mark the beginning of the 20th century, 1885, with the new imperialism. And they talk about a short 19th century, roughly the Enlightenment, 1885, and a long 20th century. And other historians have different markers. They mark the beginning of the 20th century in 1914. And they mark a short 20th century with a long 19th. Now, for our purposes, I'm not sure how much it really matters. But you are trying to get an idea about, characteristics of an age and what makes the 20th century different from the 19th. All right. So the material for this week is focusing on World War I. Now, of course, World War I is the 1914 marker for the beginning of the 20th century. And what you're going to be doing this week, in terms of historical skills, you're going to be focusing on trying to determine causes and consequences. So we've got a secondary source and a whole bunch of primary sources. And from these sources, you are looking for any clues as to what the causes of World War I were and what the consequences for World War I were. And the documents, the documents are pretty interesting in my mind as far as this goes, because many of the documents comment on them. So I'll give you an example. Document number 6, that piece by Lenin, War and Revolution. Obviously, the Russian Revolution was a consequence of World War I. So you've got this document created by perhaps, the major personality of that revolution. But in the document, he's describing why the war started in the first place. So he attributes causes to the consequence, if that makes any sense. Anyway, maybe I need more coffee. So y'all pay attention to that kind of stuff through these different documents. Read that Fromkin piece carefully. That's the secondary source describing what happens during Europe's, he calls it the last summer. And then we've got some pieces of fiction. We've got some poetry. We've got some art. And we have some more, political tracts and some memorandums. So y'all go through these
documents laying out what do you feel are the causes and consequences of World War I. Now, in terms of the causes of World War I, of course, the easy answer is the cause, excuse me, the cause of World War I is the assassination of the Archduke, right? And that drags in, one set of alliances and a new set of alliances and a new set of alliances and a new set of alliances. But that assassination can only be the cause of World War One if we are going to blame the guy who lit his cigarette at the gas station that was full of combustible material to begin with. Well, maybe the gas station's not a good idea. You should know not to smoke a cigarette at a gas station. But the guy who lights the match in a room full of combustible material, how'd all the combustible material get there in the first place? And one of the things I want you to do as you watch is I want you to recall the last couple of chapters. The chapters on westernization. What's this have to do with World War One? The chapters on imperialism and colonialism. What does this have to do with World War One? The chapters on capitalism and industrialization. What does this have to do with World War One? I think that if you keep those chapters in mind in terms of what's going on in the 19th century to, start the 20th century off, literally with a bang, right? That might be useful. And historians, there's some historical interpretations of World War One that make the argument that World War One had been brewing up for a very long time in Europe. That the idea of a major international war centered on Europe. Some historians make this argument that goes back into the 1880s, and that the new imperialism kind of takes the war out of Europe, or it takes the conflict out of Europe, and it places it elsewhere. And then as we're getting towards the end of that new imperialist period, in terms of all the pieces of the cake already having been claimed, right? That now European powers look back at each other. So that's an interesting way to think about what's brewing up with World War One. And here we are in the 101st anniversary of its beginning, and there's a lot of folks who don't know a whole lot about World War One. So it's a good spot to focus our attentions. That's about all I have to say about this. I got one other thing. It's sort of on the side. There is a podcast by a guy named Dan Carlin, and he does two podcasts. One podcast is called Common Sense, and that is a political podcast that may or may be to your liking. His politics, I don't think anybody's politics are neutral, but he's not blazingly one end of the spectrum or one other end of the spectrum. But the podcast I wanted to point out is he does a podcast called Hardcore History. And Hardcore History is a really interesting podcast. It's really more audiobooks than historical podcasts, in the sense that he chooses a topic and stays with it for 12, 18 hours, something like this. He is not a historian, but he was an undergraduate in history, either at the University of Colorado or Colorado State. I don't remember which one. And then he went into journalism with his history degree, and then he's come in and to doing these podcasts. But anyway, it's a drawn out way of saying he has a hardcore history podcast that is focused on World War One. In fact, it's his most recent one. I think there's 4 episodes to it so far. I don't remember, but the point is, if you are interested in World War One, and you are interested in more of a detail of the history of war and sort of what you might think of as the military history, and these were the generals at this particular battle, and this is what the historians say, went on at this particular battle, and this other battle was very important because of, and these are the different kinds of, just the technologies involved. If you're interested in more of a history of war, this chapter is going to be a little unsatisfying to you, and so is the next one on World War II, frankly, because that's not really the focus here. The focus is really trying to look at the role that World War I plays in the shaping of the 21st century, as opposed to getting into the nitty-gritty details of skirmishes and battles and the whole military history of the war, which is interesting stuff. But anyway, this is a drawn out way of saying that if you are interested in that more militarized aspect of World War I, the Dan Carlin podcast, Hardcore History, focused on World War I can't think of the name of it, but the word Armageddon is in there someplace. Look that one up. They're good. He uses good sources. He uses good. So here is, Eric Martin, the historian, giving the thumbs up to Dan Carlin's podcast based on his use of sources and his efforts to try to come to terms with different historical interpretations. Anyway, there you have it. Okay, as usual, if y'all have any questions for me, call me at the office. Email me through our website, drop by the office, and until then, enjoy your historical studies.